Okay, let's start with the word of prayer. Father, thank you so much for a beautiful day. We pray that you will help guide us through these difficult, rocky times that we're experiencing in the world today. Pray that we will take comfort in the fact of the glorious gift of salvation that you've given us through your Son, Jesus Christ, and the comfort that you give us and the understanding that you give us in your prophetic word. Pray that you'll bless us this day. In Jesus' name, amen. Well, today I'm going to talk about gradually, then suddenly. And I think it's a theme that we've all talked a little bit about over the last few months as we look into what is going on, and we wonder how we got here. And it seems like it happened suddenly, but it was happening gradually. And I think this is very much the way that things happen in Bible prophecy. You know, we talk about the convergence of events that are taking place in the world or that are predicted in prophetic scripture and that we can see at least the beginnings of here in the times in which we live. It has been an interesting 2020. It seems like somebody posted a thing on Facebook this week. I've been looking all day for your update. Well, it's Friday. You know, she said, well, it seems like it should be Sunday. And I think that's what it happens a lot of times. You know, sometimes I've talked to Pam and I'll say, it's really like noon on Monday. Is that all? Because of the week. And then sometimes I'll just say, okay, you know, I have enough for this week. And a couple weeks ago, I posted that at about 9 o'clock on Monday morning. Because enough had happened since I had talked on Sunday that I didn't really need anything more. But it is a very disrupted world. So I'm going to talk a little bit. I mean, when you think of gradually, then suddenly, and I'm going to tell you where that phrase comes from in a few moments. But I wonder what would happen if the Apostle Paul was here today, and what would he say? And would he say, well, I didn't really see that one coming? He might because because I think when you look at this verse, it is something that happens gradually at first that I don't think a lot of people even notice. There are some people who have the gift of discernment will see some of these trends and some of these things happening, particularly with regard to false teaching and apostasy in the church. But it happens both gradually, and then eventually somebody will say, well, where did that come from? Well, then you can look backwards historically and see how these things have developed. But listen to what Paul says in the second chapter of Timothy, verse 4. And remember, this is some of the last words that he wrote before he was martyred for Christ. For the time will come when they will not endure sound doctrine. So you see how he says it, the time will come when they will not endure sound doctrine. But I think it's something that you see it when it happens, and then you understand that it started gradually and it was building over time. For the time will come when they will not endure sound doctrine, but after their own lust shall they heap to themselves teachers, having itching ears. And they shall turn away their ears from the truth and shall be turned unto fables. Now, I refer to this verse quite a bit because I think it's highly indicative or representative of the times in which we live. People are turning their ears away from the truth. They're turning under fables. They want their ears tickled. And it's happening on all sides. You see it in the dominionist strain or the kingdom now strain in the church, where they say, we're going to bring in the kingdom, and when we do a good enough job bringing in the kingdom, then Jesus will return. Now, my response to that is, and I'm premillennial in my eschatology, I believe that Jesus will return and set up a kingdom. I do not believe that the world will be right on the verge of a messianic kingdom when he comes. He will take care of it. Our job is to occupy. And my point often is that if the church was supposed to build the kingdom, we've been at it for 2,000 years. And I don't think you can point to almost any place on the planet, even a small community, where kingdom principles, what we would consider to be the messianic kingdom principles, were enacted, enforced, or how people lived. In which case, If the church is to bring in the kingdom for 2,000 years, the church, in my view, has been a miserable failure. I do not think the church is a failure. But if the church is to build the kingdom, it has been. I think history demonstrates that. And I think that then helps us understand a little bit too that this is not to be the church's primary mission. So I want to look at some things. I want you to keep in mind this gradually, then suddenly, and I will eventually tell you where that comes from. So here's an example. This week, the High Court struck down the abortion decision or abortion legislation that was enacted in Louisiana that required doctors that perform abortions to have admitting privileges to hospital. It seems like a reasonable thing. There was a similar Texas law a few years ago that was also struck down by the Supreme Court in a 5-4 vote. The interesting thing is, though, in that vote, Chief Justice Roberts voted to uphold the law. In the vote that took place this week, the decision, though, because the court makeup has changed since that decision 4 years ago, or 5 years ago, the court, it's changed, and Roberts this time did the same thing. He turned around and he changed. And he's been, again, a major disappointment. I don't think he's a real conservative. I think he's, at best, a liberal. You can make a lot of different arguments. And so Roberts changed. And as a result, the Louisiana law was struck down. Now, I've heard people, commentators on radio, try to make these clever arguments. Well, you know, Roberts is just setting it up so that when the time comes, he can really take care of Roe versus Wade. But listen, this is a perfect case where whatever John Roberts may have been, I believe that gradually over time he changed, and then suddenly he seems like he's not what we really wanted or what the president wanted. I went to law school. Started law school a few years after Roe versus Wade was decided by the Supreme Court. And even 4 years after Roe had been decided, I had a very liberal, I would call him a classic liberal, constitutional law professor, was not that impressed with the decision. He said there were major problems with it. It was just sort of made up. It was overreaching by the court, but nevertheless, he supported it because of the result. It was something that he liked. But Roberts is younger than I am, and he came along and he grew up he was trained in the same legal education system where Roe was sort of lauded as a great seminal work of the U.S. Supreme Court. And so whatever standards he might have had with regard to constitutional law and that type of thing, I don't think he resisted the assault on them that he got from the legal profession and the legal education system. Now, I'm not saying that I'm any better than anybody else that I saw through the nonsense, but very few do. So this is something that happened. So the decision this week was, look, you really can't do anything to restrict abortion. That's the paramount right that we need to protect. So it's a very disappointing decision. Now, I'm going to kind of bounce around a little bit about some of the things that are going on. I'll talk a little bit about coronavirus. I'll talk about the Middle East near the end and the myriad of things that are going on there this week. But I'll also talk a little bit, for example, this coronavirus thing continues to have an impact. It has a big economic impact. Regardless of whether the lockdowns were right or whatever, the fact of the matter is the lockdowns have had a major impact on the economy. A lot of that was coming, I think, when China shut down, but certainly the lockdowns made it much worse. And here's an article from this morning's New York Times. Malls continue to lose their anchor stores and face being set adrift. And it's an article about the fact that what you see going on all over the country is that the anchor stores in these malls are closing. So there's a mall not too far from where we live at Tuttle Crossing, and They used, I mean, when they opened, I think they had like Kaufman's and Macy's and Sears and J.C. Penney were the 4 anchor stores. Of course, then Kaufman's went out of business. Sears went out of business. J.C. Penney is barely hanging on. Macy's used to occupy 2 of the anchor store places. Now I think they have an entertainment center in one of the old Kaufman store. But this is happening all over the country. This article looks at a number of malls, Northfield Mall outside of Chicago, where JCPenney is the only remaining anchor store in a 4-store mall, a 4 anchor store mall. Well, once the anchor stores go away, a lot of the little businesses go. Victoria's Secret, which is based locally here, has said that they were going to close 250 stores this week. Other retailers, or 250 stores this year in malls around the United States. A lot of malls don't want to be enclosed malls with what's going on with the virus and that type of thing. Do people want to be in a mall, a big enclosed mall where there's a lot of people? Listen to this. This is from the article today. Major mall operators have started to signal concern. The Simon Property Group out of Indianapolis, the biggest mall operator in the United States, is trying to terminate its $3.6 billion deal to acquire Taubman Centers, which owns and operates about 24 high-end shopping centers. In court filings last month, Simon Property said that Taubman's malls were mostly enclosed and that indoor malls are the last types of retail real estate properties that most consumers will want to visit after COVID-19. Simon Property itself also owns many enclosed malls, but what they were doing is they were trying to get out of the contract by claiming that because of this virus thing that came up after they signed the contract, that it makes really the performance of the contract impossible or impractical. And these are legal arguments that they're making to get out of the contract. And I think Victoria's Secret, Intimate Brands, was also to be sold to someone, and they're trying to get out of, the people they were selling it to are trying to get out of the contract. So everything is in this state of flux. There's one, it says here, CBL and Associates Property, which owns and operates about 60 malls, outlet stores, and open-air shopping centers in the United States, said in filings last month that it was skipping about $30 million in interest payments due in June to, quote, advance discussions with its lenders and explore alternative strategies, and that there was, quote, substantial doubt, unquote, it would continue to operate as a going concern. When companies say that, they're on the verge of bankruptcy. You're going to see more and more of this. And it's going to have a huge impact. Maybe people only want to go to mainly outdoor malls. And what are you going to do with these millions and millions and millions of square feet of retail properties? In one place, Google took over the mall and they put in some offices. But how many Googles are there that can do that? This is going to have a major impact on the economy. With regard to the coronavirus, there's some very inconsistent things that are happening. Here is an article. This is from this morning's Seattle Times. We repent. Front page, above the fold, a big article about how evangelical leaders are repenting and, frankly, bowing the knee to Black Lives Matter. It's egregious. It breaks my heart. But again, that's a thing that it seems sudden. But if we've been paying attention, we would see that gradually they were building to this type of thing. And it's happening on every feature. So I will give our video guru there in the back credit for sending me this morning. This is from Campus Reform. You should look it up and read this and click on the links. Student ousted from Christian school for TikTok hate speech criticizing Black Lives Matter. And the article reports this is what happened. This is a student at Hardin-Simmons University in, I think they're in Texas, maybe. It's ostensibly a Christian school. Put Christian in scare quotes because I don't think it is. And here's just the summary of the article. One student is no longer enrolled at Hardin-Simmons University after her peers called for the university to respond to controversial social media posts. The university made a public statement confirming that the student is no longer enrolled at the school. And in fact, they posted this in a Twitter post. Hardin-Simmons University became aware late this evening of a deeply disappointing and unacceptable social media post by one of our students. Now listen, do these people have nothing better to do that run this university? Come on. Are they looking at people who are supporting Black Lives Matter and are doing anything about the hate that's coming out of that? They're not doing a thing. They have bowed the knee to Baal. If you send your kid to Hardin-Simmons, you deserve to, I hope they charge you $100,000 a year, and you deserve to lose every penny of it and waste it if you're not smart enough to see through this nonsense that this so-called Christian university is putting out. Here is the president of the university defending what he did to the student. What she did was essentially said, listen, if a white cop kills a black person, we have protests, but if a black kills a white or a black kills a black, it doesn't seem to register on anybody's radar. And we see story after story, week after week after week, record number of shootings in Chicago, 3-year-old killed, 12-year-old killed, just walking down the street. And not a peep from all these social justice warriors. This is a Marxist revolution. This is a war on the truth. It's a war on the rule of law. And it is, I think, a clear demonstration that we live in times where the lawless one will soon come to power. And it'll seem sudden, but believe me, look back at this one and a bunch of other of my friends who do prophecy updates, and you'll see this has been gradually building for a long time. Here is what the president had to say to defend the unjustifiable action of what he did to this student. Now, hang on a minute here. I had the thing. Okay, so here's what I'll do. Give me 1 second.
I became aware late Tuesday evening of a deeply disappointing and unacceptable social media post by one of our students. As we said that night, the message shared by this student is not reflective of the Christian values of our institution or the vast majority of our community. What the student did was wrong. Upon learning about this post, we immediately took action to address the situation and began a required disciplinary process. Individuals and news outlets have asked the university to disclose the specific steps and disciplinary actions taken regarding this issue. The university takes the privacy of each individual student's information seriously, and we must comply with federal law. As a result, we're not able to share certain details. However, we can confirm that the student associated with this incident is no longer enrolled at Hardin-Simmons University. As citizens, we have certain rights of freedom of speech in public forums, like many of the social media platforms. However, within the HSU community, that right is always linked with our responsibility as Christians, as well as inherent responsibility for the consequences of our words and our actions. Social media can be a powerful tool. Used in the wrong way, it can have detrimental consequences. The views we express on social media should reflect the values and beliefs we uphold as followers of Christ. We must all use these platforms to build each other up and not tear each other down. After listening to the students, faculty, and staff about the events of this week, many people have shared with me their hurt and pain. Several students from various backgrounds have told me that what this student did is not representative of HSU, and others need to know who we really are. At Hardin-Simmons, we believe and practice unity through loving our neighbor as ourselves and treating all people equally with profound respect. As Christians, we're called to love one another as Christ first loved us. We must hold one another accountable to this standard. Hate speech or racist comments by anyone are completely unacceptable. And we do not want to condone behavior that questions people's worth, their value, their dignity, or their equality. I've been encouraged by the words and actions of many people I connected with this week. And I also saw our faculty respond with their resolve to stand by our students, prioritizing anti-racism education for our entire campus.
Here's the translation. We are all in on social justice, man. I wish I was on the board at Hardin-Simmons. I really do wish I was on the board. And if anybody is a board member out there listening to this, you need to get rid of these kind of people because they are destroying the faith and truth that institutions, particularly Christian institutions, should stand for. And we shouldn't stand for this kind of nonsense. And I am censoring my words of what I want to say like crazy right now. It does make me angry. So the John Haller response to this is baloney. You don't care about this student. You don't care about this truth. You care about your job. Take a stand, man. Hardin-Simmons, we should have a list each week. Hardin-Simmons gone. Other places gone. Here's what the faculty said. I'm going to read it for you. I want you to, because sometimes people say I shouldn't read the whole thing. I want you to hear their own words. So this is the open letter issued by the faculty of Hardin-Simmons. We as members of the faculty of Hardin-Simmons University denounce racism and repudiate any attempt to dismiss the realities of racial injustice in the United States. We emphatically say Black Lives Matter. I will note this. A rich black woman worth billions of dollars, Oprah Winfrey, is black. I have never heard a person in my life say that she didn't deserve that or earn that or whatever. We had a black president. Now, I don't think he deserved it. I don't think he earned it. But nevertheless, the letter continues, we stand by our students, faculty, and staff of color, demand that their voices be heard, and we reject any suggestion that their lived experiences are baseless or invalid. We affirm them in their lives. We are angry that our BIPOC, I suppose that means black, I guess it's BLPOC, black people of color students, faculty, and staff, continue to encounter racism within academia and on social media. We recognize that as educators, we have a responsibility to have hard conversations in our classrooms. Really? You're shutting this girl up who asked valid questions, and you had the audacity to say that you want to have hard discussions in your classrooms? Baloney. To elevate the voices of those who have gone unheard, to approach conversations about privilege and racial justice with humility and with a posture to listen and to learn and to teach students to do the same. You will note that as a Christian university, there was a study done many years ago, because I was on a college board, Christian college board for many years, a quarter of a century in fact, and there was a study that was done that said that one of the purposes of the board members is to protect the historical theological roots of the institution. And I'm saying that if the board members allow this to go on, they are failing in their task as board members. And with the posture to listen and to learn and to teach students, do the same. Baloney number, what's that, 3 balonies now? We commit to the work of anti-racism in our classrooms and to work alongside the administration as they prioritize anti-racism education for our entire campus. Here, let me save you some time. Racism is wrong in any form. Marxism is an anti-God system. It's what they say about capitalism. It's the worst system ever created except for every other one. It's not perfect. Facebook continues to have a lot of problems because the corporate people that want to control free speech, they're all over Facebook. Well, if you don't remove what we consider to be hate speech, we will not advertise with you. And so now Facebook is facing a bit of a crisis. So when certain advertisers, as the article in the Spectator of Australia says, so when certain advertisers started to pull out of the social media platforms, citing the divisive content it hosts, newspapers were thrilled. The reaction is understandable but misguided. The rise of politicized corporations, which are moving away from their previous neutrality and taking sides in culture wars, is a threat to all publishers. It has implications for press freedom and for the variety of opinion available to the public. And it is a battle that will be with us for some time. Advertisers say they are abandoning Facebook to preserve neutrality and avoid being seen to associate with outlying opinions. This rationale overlooks a fairly basic point. Advertising is not endorsement. It is absurd to think that a newspaper advertiser agrees with every article on its pages. The failure to understand or this point drags companies down a murky path where they have to make clear which opinions they do agree with. Soon they will find themselves laying out their own manifestos, which risk alienating customers. And it's about time we recognize the fact that these companies are going to be alienating and contrary to what we consider to be good biblical values. Now, the next story, this happened in St. Louis, and there is a video playing in the Twitter on the left. This is a couple. They live in a gated community near downtown St. Louis. The protesters were on their way to protest the mayor, who I guess who supports them, but is not sufficiently woke enough to demand a resignation. They broke through the gate. They went through this couple's onto their private estate there. And the couple felt threatened. It was at least 300 people in the mob. And here's what so you can see what they're doing, and listen to what the Soros-backed leftist Marxist prosecuting attorney for that circuit in Missouri, in St. Louis circuit, said, Kimberly Gardner. This is frightening. This is a person who will make decisions about who gets prosecuted or not. What decisions do you think she's going to make? Listen to her.
I am disturbed by the events that occurred over this weekend, where there were peaceful protesters who were met with guns and a violent assault. We must protect the rights to peacefully protest, and any attempts to chill it through intimidation or use of force will not be tolerated. Since learning of these events over this weekend, I've worked with the public and the police to investigate these tragic events. Make no mistake, the Circuit Attorney's Office will not tolerate the use of force or intimidation to affect the rights of individuals to peacefully protest and to protect their First Amendment right. And I will use every extent of Missouri law to hold individuals accountable.
She does not care about the rights that people have under the Second Amendment of the United States Constitution. She cares about advancing a Marxist agenda. None of these people, do you think any of these people that broke through their gates and trespassed on that property are going to be charged with anything? Anybody want to have a 1% chance that'll happen? And that's probably the highest I could get anybody to take a wager on. It's not going to happen. That's not a violent assault, by the way. Missouri has a stand your ground law. So not only is she a leftist, she's an ignoramus. When I see these things happen, I think of the Bible verse that says, professing themselves wise, they became fools. So, if that's not enough, here's a proposal put out by Virginia Democrats as to things that they want, a 24-point plan of what they want to introduce. And highlighted in yellow there is this: defelonize assault on law enforcement officers, return to misdemeanor offense. So we want it to be a misdemeanor offense, not a felony, to assault a police officer. They don't need to defund the police. They just need to enact nonsense like this. And I hear stories from here locally that I have verified that the mayor of Columbus has told people to stand down, the cops to stand down. And these people, they march in these things and they cuss and they swear at the cops and say, we want to come to your house and kill your family. And the cops are supposed to do nothing. Yeah. Terrorist threats being made on the streets of Columbus, and our mayor is so woke. Yeah. I don't know, on the woke scale, do you get like, does it like circle back around to dead? A dead mind?
Broke or broke?
I don't know. Yeah, of course I didn't remove, so everybody was upset with these protesters tearing down statues all over the place. So if it's terrorists that are tearing down statues, Freudian slip there, I guess the mayor is one here in Columbus because he tore down the Columbus statue the other day. Are we changing the name of this town? What is it going to be, Whoville or something like that? The Grinch that stole your town's name. This is a made-up January 21st, 2021 headline, front page of the New York Times. Biden inaugurated, nightmare is over. And it talks about all the people being appointed to cabinet positions: Fauci, Elizabeth Warren, Buttigieg, Jeff Bezos, and Attorney General Barr will be indicted by the new Attorney General, Kamala Harris. So I just point this up. If you all think that everything's going to turn around and be okay, or things don't matter about what's happening, and that just put this up print this off and put it on your refrigerator and try to get to sleep at night. Because I don't think it'll happen. If this happens, that will be the nightmare in my view. I don't know if you saw what they did. I don't have a picture of it. You can find it on Twitter pretty easily. Jeff Bezos, the richest man on the planet, I think he's now worth like $170 billion. His home in Washington, D.C., these Black Lives Matter, Antifa protesters, you know what they did? They erected in front of his house a guillotine. That's what they want to do. This is what happened with the Jacobins and the French Revolution. You can read about it. Hundreds of thousands of people were beheaded. And a lot of them were people that supported the revolution in the first place because they weren't sufficiently woke. So like they marching to the mayor of St. Louis to get rid of her. Eventually they're coming after Anthony Ginther here in Columbus because he's not going to be woke enough. We're in the midst of a revolution. And it's about time we took stock of that. And they have different things. Now, this is a very interesting article. Is This the End of History by Roger Kimball in the Spectator magazines. And I find, I'm always interested when these little biblical terms and that type of thing kind of get thrown up by these magazines and their magazine covers. And of course, this one, we've heard a lot of speculation about Jared Kushner because of his involvement in a lot of things in the Trump administration. And here, what do they call Kushner? the prince. That's kind of chilling, to me. Now, I'm not sure I'm fully on board with some of the speculation about Kushner, but I'm sure he's woke. And if you see down here, there's I'm trying to look and see what the book he has his hand on. Trump. The alt. I can't quite read it, so. Oh, The Art of the Deal. Okay, thank you. But listen to what Roger Kimball says in his article. Is this the end of history? And this is where I got the title today, so I want to give him credit for it. And I look back through his articles, and this comes up every now and then. Midway through Hemingway's The Sun Also Rises, there occurs this exchange between two characters. How did you go bankrupt, Bill asked. 2 ways, Mike said. Gradually, then suddenly. The process of civilizational bankruptcy takes a similar course. And we could say it's the same thing with theological bankruptcy or apostasy. Casual, seemingly isolated attacks on the fabric of civilization or theology feel at first like so many harmless insect bites. A speaker is shouted down. A statue is vandalized or removed. A college course once deemed essential is rebaptized as offensive. First it is pilloried, then it is canceled. People start quoting Tocqueville's warning that in a democracy, as large inequalities dissolve, small inequalities are magnified, growing both rancid and rancorous. Political posturing is everywhere. At first it seems effete and merely silly. Then it grows muscles and claws. Then posturing now becomes bricks, baseball bats, and Molotov cocktails. Grievances blur and lose their specificity. Every slight becomes a pretext for boundless rage. The system, ordered liberty, and the rule of law is rudely shoved into the dustbin of history. Civility itself, the social compact that makes society possible, is tossed aside as an impediment to justice. Is this the precipice upon which we are now perched? HBO has pulled the movie, a period classic, Gone with the Wind, because the classic Civil War story is a product of time and depicts some of the ethnic and racial prejudice that have, unfortunately, been commonplace in American society. And while you get your mind around that nugget of politically correct virtue signaling, note that Cops, a TV show that depicts the police in a positive light, is being summarily canceled amid nationwide anti-police protest after Mr. Floyd's killing. I don't have to tell you who Mr. Floyd is. Mr. Kimball says this: the drug-abusing criminal who died in police custody at the end of May has been beatified in death. Thousands attended his funeral. In fact, if you look back at that Seattle Times article about We Repent, the head of this Northwestern association or university or college or whatever in Kirkland, Washington, he attended. He went to Texas for the funeral. They shouted, many more thousand took to the streets. They shouted George Floyd as they looted Nike stores, smashed windows, and incinerated cars and police stations. Mr. Floyd was a pretext, not a cause. The cause was destruction of our civilization. Item: on June 9, 1,000 people gathered at Byrd Park in Richmond, Virginia to stand in solidarity with indigenous peoples. One object of their wrath was an 8-foot statue of Christopher Columbus, which they toppled and dragged to a nearby lake. Columbus represents genocide, the protesters said. It seems they managed their rampage without the aid of Sarah Parcak, an Egyptologist at the University of Alabama, who had taken to Twitter the previous week to provide rioters with tips about how to topple obelisks. Twitter may be policing conservative pundits. By the way, I looked up the Twitter account of the student who was expelled from Hardin-Simmons. Gone. It's gone. Black Lives Matter protests, showing them tearing down things, that's fine. Madeline Odent, curator of Royston Museum in Hertfordshire, England, who sent round instructions about how to use household chemicals to cause damage to marble memorials of racists that would be irreversible. In case you were wondering who the racist in questions might be, she provided a picture of Winston Churchill's defaced statue. We have ignited a furnace that promises to consume us all. As I write, word just came in that the president and board chair of the Poetry Foundation have been forced to step down. I mentioned this last week because a public statement they published on June 3rd expressing solidarity with the Black community and declaring their dedication to the strength and power of poetry to uplift in times of despair was deemed insufficiently craven. Nearly 2,000 poets wrote in to demand that the foundation dedicate more funding to anti-racism efforts. I wonder if their letters were written in poetic verse. I could go on and on. Talk about Yale University. He says this. In the meantime, I want to remind readers of a famous passage from Orwell's 1984, which says this. Do you realize, Winston says to his girlfriend Julia, that the past has been abolished? Every record has been destroyed. Every book has been rewritten. Every picture has been repainted. Every statue and street and building has been renamed. Every date has been altered, and that process is continuing day by day and minute by minute. History has stopped. Kimball then says, I say famous, but perhaps I should have said misunderstood. Notwithstanding the behavior of our new iconoclasts and history haters, Orwell was not actually writing a how-to manual. But it turns out that that's what people are doing, exactly what he predicted. On the left is just a little video of a protest. I think this took place in New York. And if you watch this, you can find it on Twitter and YouTube and that type of thing. But what you'll see is this protest is Black Lives Matter. But what do you see? You see Palestinian flags, Palestinian caliphas, and you'll see speakers get up and they'll say essentially, hey, listen, it's all about Palestine and the Jews. And so what happens is, Caroline Glick has written about it, I have talked about it, others have talked about it. At the core of this Black Lives Matter movement is an anti-Semitic, anti-Jewish hatred of Jewish people. And it comes to the fore. And so did you see any Columbus station put this up? Did you see any major media outlet put this up? You can find this stuff, but you got to dig. But it's out there because this is okay. They'll leave this up on Twitter. This is okay. So, and this article, this is also from the Spectator group of magazines, which I think I'm going to subscribe this week. Well, I'm sure that didn't go out over the When tens of thousands of protesting Australians, this is the article, burned down the system, having failed to build a better world, the left now wish to destroy it. When tens of thousands of professing Australians escape penalty for defying strict rules forbidding mass assembly, you must accept we are not equal under the law. When elected representatives and other alleged grown-ups watch in silence, take the knee, or express endorsement of the noble cause behind the often violent protest, you know our democratic way of life is being surrendered without a fight. And when mobs of militant teenagers fearlessly target police with obscenities and projectiles, anarchy isn't far away. A New York Times columnist gets to the heart of it all. Quote, galvanized by images of police brutality and the message of Black Lives Matter, many young voters think taking to the streets may be much more effective than voting. And indeed, they might be. In her book, The War on Cops, Heather McDonald writes a police officer is 18.5 times more likely to be killed by a black male than an unarmed black male is to be killed by a police officer. Of those killed by police, less than 4% involved a white officer and an unarmed black man. In fact, although African Americans commit 44% of all murders, they are less likely than whites to die at the hands of police. It seems for white lives, different standards apply. Excellent article. No wonder police officers are handing in their badges, he writes. Mr. Newsom, governor of California, is clear on his agenda. He's about power and the downfall of Western civilization. By invoking police brutality and past injustices like slavery, he cynically exploits black communities for his own ideological purposes. He and his socialist radicals know that black or white, those who believe in nothing, will fall for anything. And that right now, all seem on course for misery. And I don't know if I got the headline. Well, I had the front page of this morning's Sacramento Bee. I don't see it in my slides. And it says this: Newsom bans singing at church. Noisy protest. Okay, I'll tell you what. I've got this on my... I'm going to put this in, so just give me 1 second here. Again, I always like to document well, for some reason it didn't make it. So go look, you can go museums, front pages, and you can find the headline of the Sacramento Bee right there. Newsom bans singing in churches. And big protests are okay. Oh, by the way, Newsom has a winery up in wine country in California, and it's open. You might want to go up there and get drunk on it, because even though he makes some money off of it, because, you know, I'll almost lose the ability to form the words about what I want to say. And, you know, I want to say it's over, California gone, all that stuff, and you can look at that. So last week I mentioned this cover from The Economist, and again, in the series of like the Spectator cover, now The Economist cover with the next catastrophe, and it has 7 or 8 things there that are happening. And the one on the left is a pig. Now, that can mean one of two things. Some people wrote to me and said, well, that means that meat's going up in price and pork will be hard to find. And then somebody sent me an article about a Costco that somebody went to buy pork shoulder to, you know, smoke and roast for the 4th of July weekend. And as he was starting to walk away from it, he was talking to the guy in the meat cutter, and the guy says, I don't know if you really want to buy that. He goes, why? He goes, did you check the price? It's $31 a pound. So maybe this is part of a famine that's coming. It also might be related to this. This was announced that there's potentially a new virus that's in the swine population that could jump into humans that would be similar or worse than the current coronavirus. And so we can argue about the coronavirus and whether it's real, it's fake, and all this other stuff. Listen, my concern has long been that it could be a bioweapon. And if it is a bioweapon, this is a brilliant war operation by the country where the virus, everybody seems to agree, originated. Put out a virus, get everybody all hyped up, put in all restrictions, and then the virus doesn't turn out to be as bad as everybody thought. Then release the bad one. And everybody will say, well, you lied to me about this one, you're lying to me about this one. So I'm not sure we're not in the midst of a bioterror war, and I'm concerned about it. You see these things coming out, like this is the front page of this morning's New York Times, about the upper picture is on March 1st, there were 88 reported coronavirus cases in the United States. That seems like a decade ago now, almost. It's only been 4 months. But researchers estimate that there were actually thousands of hidden infections by that date. And in the chart below, that picture shows what they think was really going on March 1st. And there's some science to support this. The other thing that I don't think a lot of people address or really want to talk about is, regardless of whether they've coded things correctly on COVID, the fact is, and there's study after study about this out now, is there were thousands and thousands and thousands and thousands of excess deaths. If you look at historically what you would expect people to die, there was a spike back in April and May all over the world. Some of that's probably related to people not getting healthcare help. They're staying away from the hospitals. They're not getting cancer screenings. I've heard stories of people having heart attacks and not calling an ambulance because they're going to take them to the hospital where they could get even sicker. So there are a lot of excess deaths. There are a lot of coronavirus deaths, and all of it is just a massive problem. This is from this morning's London Times, the Times on Sunday. 7-year COVID trail revealed. If you can get a hold of this, I would recommend that you read this article, because it lays out the fact that there were some issues with this virus and where it came from and how it was transferred through this lab in China. And I think it's a very, very well done article. I just don't have time to go into the details of it, but I'll just flag it for you. That's the Times on Sunday. I'll try to post it on my Facebook page, the text of the article, if I remember. I'm sure somebody will remind me if I forget, but I think it's well worth reading. It may be behind a paywall. That's because I say a link to it may not work. This is the New Economist magazine or newspaper, weekly newspaper from France. And it talks about the next catastrophe. Now, this one's talking about an asteroid. And again, I'll only point out, this is an economic magazine. And it's talking about things that the Bible sees, like an asteroid hitting the earth or a mountain falling into the sea. And they're talking about it. At the same time, Macron's not doing real well. He's got a lot of attacks on him. He booted the prime minister. He'll be up for election in 2022, and we'll see how that goes. Things don't seem to be going that great for him. In Hong Kong, they're cracking down on dissidents. They've enacted this law. By the way, there was a picture of a guy with a knee on his neck by the Chinese police. To date, I don't think there have been any marches in Hong Kong protesting the treatment that individual received as he was arrested. So let's look at the Middle East for the rest of the time that we have. Here is, there was a virtual meeting this week, of course, now. I suppose there's an advantage to it. Putin's travel schedule is much lighter these days. He's not flying all over the place meeting with people. Erdogan is not flying all over the place meeting with people. But they're doing virtual meetings. So they had a virtual meeting this week in which the Putin, Rouhani, and Erdogan of Turkey got together to discuss how to ease the tensions in Syria. It happened on July 1st. Russia, Turkey, and Iran, which support opposing sides in Syria's wars, agreed Wednesday to coordinate their efforts to reduce tensions in the country whose conflict has entered its 10th year. The three reiterated their determination to enhance the trilateral coordination, said a joint statement issued at the end of a video conference between their leaders. The declaration also emphasized their strong commitment to the sovereignty, independence, unity, and territorial integrity of Syria. Ha, ha, ha. And of course, they had this virtual conference. This is from the Kremlin's official website. Talks about some of the things accomplished at this. Expressed grave concern at the humanitarian situation in Syria and the impact of COVID-19 pandemic. They rejected all unilateral sanctions, which are in contravention of international law, international humanitarian law, and the UN Charter, particularly in the face of the COVID-19 pandemic. They emphasized in this regard the critical need to ensure rapid, safe, and unhindered humanitarian access throughout Syria in order to alleviate the suffering of the Syrian people, and called upon the international community, particularly UN and its humanitarian agencies, to increase their assistance to all Syrians without discrimination, politicization, and preconditions. Reaffirmed their conviction that there could be no military solution to the Syrian conflict. And I guess if they're sitting there, why don't you take care of these people in Syria? You're running the ship. So, but this is what you would expect. So you have Putin, then you have, I think, Erdogan speaking, and I'll talk a little bit more about Erdogan because he's been a very busy man lately. And then, of course, you have Rouhani of Iran. Zarif is also there. He's been a busy man over the last few days, too. And the whole thing seems to be unwinding. And so here's pictures of what's going on. This is Syria. This is, I think the first one is Damascus. This lady talking, she comes back, her house is gone, everything's destroyed. Memories flooded back. I just started crying. I lived in this house, I grew up in it. I raised my children here. No words are enough to describe the effects of years of war in Syria. Aleppo, Dar ez-Zor, rural Damascus, and beyond. Big problem. I mean, look, Russia wanted to get the contracts to build all that stuff, but who's going to pay for it? That's the problem. I mean, the country's been destroyed. Okay, I'm not sure what happened here. My computer just... I'll go here. Whoops, that's not what I want. Well, I'm not sure why that... I will say this, that was the fastest reboot in history because that thing just popped right back up. So here we go, we'll get back to where we were. Maybe Putin's watching. Maybe Rouhani's watching. If so, pay attention to the rest of this. So here's an article in the Jerusalem Post from Jonathan Spire. Highly recommend that you go to do it. He talks about Erdogan's arc of destabilization. And so what Erdogan is doing, and Seth Fransman in a later article describes this at the Jerusalem Post as Erdogan's Crisis of the Month Club. And so every month he creates and solves a new crisis to build himself up. And he has political problems at home, and he has economic problems. But he's clearly in charge, and he's wreaking a lot of havoc across the Mediterranean. For example, it talks about, Jonathan Spire references this article about Turkish commandos in Iraq for an anti-terror op against the PKK and YPG Kurdish militias. And here's some of the, here's a little video that was done by one of the TRT World to kind of show you where this is taking place in northern Iraq and the mountains that are in the Kurdish region and some of the attacks that they did. And so there were a number of, I think there were a number of outposts established. This is Sinjar, this is where the Yazidis live. Bombing was done there. Bombing was done essentially in all of these areas. All of these in the Kurdish regions. And it's interesting now, you have these, they look almost like video games about how they're, the three-dimensional, this is a bombing at Sinjar in the Yazidi region of Iraq. And remember how horribly they were treated by ISIS, so now Erdogan is bombing them. And it seems like Erdogan has this hold over Europe in the United States. The reports are now that he is the foreign leader that President Trump talks to more than any other in the world. And I'm troubled by it. We'll be honest with you, I'm troubled by that. Via its Sadat military company, Spire says, Ankara is deeply engaged in support of Hamas against Israel. Sadat, sometimes referred to as Erdogan's Revolutionary Guards, is involved in other similarly murky ends of Turkey's regional assertion. The company, founded by the Turkish president's military advisor, took responsibility for the training of Syrian rebels under Turkey's flag. These forces were subsequently deployed against the Syrian Kurds in the latter part of 2019 and through 2020. These militias are now engaged in Libya, fighting against the Libyan National Army. They're supporting the Turkish-funded militia are supporting the UN-backed government, but a lot of talk in this is that what's going to happen here, that what Erdogan is pushing for is the establishment of a Muslim Brotherhood state in Libya. That makes Egypt very nervous because so the whole region is destabilized, and everywhere you look, you have Erdogan. So this is from Erdogan's Twitter account. He established this maritime zone between Libya and Turkey, even though he did this with the Turkish government, even though the Turkish government that he supports doesn't control that area of Libya yet. The Turkish government is in power over in eastern Turkey. So there's a little bit better detailed map. And part of that is a maritime zone. He wants to cut off Israel's access for gas to Cyprus and Greece and on to Europe, helping out his buddy. So this is a map from South Front about the military situation there. Here's another one that's a little bit better color-wise. And so he's established sort of these outposts that break up the Kurdish travel along the northern border there. Some of it's controlled by Syria, some of it's controlled by him. But the other thing is, you mentioned, Jonathan Spire in his article mentioned that Hamas he's supporting. And this is on Erdogan's Twitter account now. Okay, so you see he's got the Libyan maritime zone. Now what's he got? The Gazan maritime zone. And what are they both designed to do? Cut off the ability of Israel to pipe its gas to Europe. Here's what it says. Palestine is also ready to sign a Libyan-style naval special economic zone with Turkey. And this is what it would look like. In Israel, Spire says, the West Bank and Gaza, Erdogan wants to lay claim to the cause of recovering Al-Aqsa from non-Muslim custodianship. Covert military support to Hamas runs alongside active soft power efforts. These are managed by the government and agency TICA. Tens of millions of dollars are spent each year via projects such as the Turkish Cultural Center on a street in Jerusalem's Old City. I don't know how to say it. Hash-el-Alet. I don't know. Look it up. Hashalshelet. I have a friend in Jerusalem. I'm confident she will send me the proper phonetic pronunciation of that street. I was also reading one of her Facebook posts this morning, and she said that they're doing a lot of contract tracing because of the virus in Israel, and it's not going very well. People are getting notices from the health officials that they need to quarantine for 14 days because you were exposed on such and such a day, and the person says, I have documented proof that I was in my house all day long that day. Well, then it says, the notice says, call this number, and do you think you can get a hold of a person? Now, look, I love Jerusalem, I love Israel, but it doesn't, my comment when we were there for a couple weeks a few years ago was, it seems like it takes twice as long to do anything in Israel as it does in America. I went to pick up a rental car, and there was a elderly Jewish couple from Florida in front of me, and it took me 45 minutes. I was the second person in line. It was 45 minutes before the wedding because they felt that the travel company should give them turn-by-turn directions for everything that they were going to visit on their month-long vacation in Israel. I'm just saying it's a fact, okay? So all of this is very problematic. This is the military situation current military situation in Libya, although the blue areas are retreating. They're really not solid blue. They're just little enclaves. They're supported by Russia. Turkey is supporting the people up around Tripoli in the west, near Tunisia, but they're picking up a lot of important areas, and this is all by design by Erdogan. This is Seth Frantman's article, How Turkey got Libya Through Crisis of the Month Strategy. And I think he's right. And then this is also from Erdogan's Twitter page. And what he says here is, never again will there be a possibility of a strong alliance between Turkey and Egypt, as it could overturn the entire strategy in favor of Israel. And remember this map from Foreign Policy a couple of years ago that shows how Turkey was using maps in its official publications that showed how they wanted to take over large portions of northern Iraq, which they're attacking this week, northern Syria, as a part of Erdogan's goal to reestablish the Ottoman Empire. And I don't think Erdogan cares whether he's the guy. It's either him or the next guy, but he's very much pro-Muslim Brotherhood, and that's a problem. There's an article in an Arab language magazine or newspaper published in London, said Arab countries must prepare for major war with Turkish Hitler Erdogan. This is written by an Egyptian. Very interesting the way he discussed this, that Erdogan has designs. And whether he's in complete control of it or not, you understand that Erdogan takes a very long view. He's not concerned about the next election cycle. He doesn't stand for election again until at least 2023 or 2025. So he's going to be a problem for whoever is the president of the United States. And you see him doing things. Even, you remember when he was here a year or two ago, they had a meeting at the White House and there were anti-Erdogan protesters in Lafayette Park. And Erdogan's security detail went and beat them. And in front of the White House of the United States. And they all got away with it. So there is a problem. This article from the Wall Street Journal the other day, Israel-Lebanon rift takes root over trees. Very interesting. What they're doing along the Lebanon border is they're taking the long view. Trees, it's hard to see through trees. If you have outposts looking from here to there and there's a tree in the way, it's hard to see through the tree. So an organization called Green Without Borders, which is a Hezbollah-funded project, is planting trees in various parts of the border. This is from the Lebanese side of the border. Do you see the trees that they've planted along the border wall? I've been along this border wall, so I've not seen this side of it. I've seen the other side that Israel patrols. And so they're planting the trees there. And it'll take them 20, 30 years, but that's okay. We take the long view of history. Now they may get to the point where they do this. You see here, this is a martyr wall that honors people from Hezbollah. And here is a memorial park, and you see the trees there that will grow up eventually to block the view. So this is part of what Hezbollah does. I'm just going to play 1 minute of this clip of an interview that the channel, the web page for Khomeini.ir English did of Nasrallah. And this thing is hours long. If you care to go, it's all subtitled, it's all translated into English. You'll hear a minute of it. I'd recommend that you listen to it because this Nasrallah guy, I think, is one of these end-time players that you need to know about. Here's what he says.
Islamic Revolution. The Israelis objected the existence of Palestinian resistance and operations carried out by Palestinians. However, this was just an excuse because Israel's runs of aggressions in southern Lebanon began in 1948, when Palestinian resistance was not present in southern Lebanon. Palestinian resistance set base in southern Lebanon in the late 60s and early 1970s, especially after the events in Jordan and the arrival of Palestinian groups from Jordan in Lebanon. It was in those circumstances that the Islamic Revolution of Iran gained victory. This victory came at a time when an atmosphere of despair was dominant in the Arab and Muslim world, and concern for the future was widespread. Egypt's withdrawal from the Arab-Israeli conflict and the signature of the Camp David Treaty, the imposition of a humiliating political process on the Palestinians and Arabs, as well as the weakness of the rulers of the Arab countries, all provoked the despair, grief, hopelessness, disappointment, and worry for the future at that time. Therefore, the victory of the Islamic Revolution of Iran in such an environment revived the lost hopes in the region and among the nations to begin with, particularly the Palestinian and Lebanese people.
And by the way, I have a bunch of stuff on my hard drive about it. Lebanon is melting down. They're talking famine. People don't have food. Nasrallah essentially runs Lebanon through Hezbollah. And understand that when Jordan kicked the Palestinians out in 1970, it gave rise to a movement called Black September. Jordan killed a lot of Palestinians at the time, kicked them out of the country, at least the leadership, Arafat and others, they went to Lebanon. And there are Palestinian refugee camps in Lebanon to this day that Nasrallah could get rid of. But it's all a political thing. You go to Syria, you go to Jordan, they're all Palestinian refugee camps. They always point at Israel, but really it's their fellow Arabs that are keeping them in these camps in many cases. And now Iran, article by Seth Frantzman again, Iran ramps up maximum pressure campaign on the West. Tehran has had this problem over the past couple of weeks of these mysterious explosions. This is the Jerusalem Post on Friday. Tehran brushes aside 3 mysterious explosions. And the answer is, well, no, today then the article says 4th mysterious explosion, and now I think there's been a 5th. Some of this comes from the Al Jareeda newspaper in Kuwait, an Arab language publication, and what they say is at least one of the things, the one outside of Tehran, that was a bombing done by Israeli F-35s, which flew to Iran and back without refueling and did their bombing. Now that's way beyond their range. They made such an allegation about a year ago, and I don't know if it's true. I'm just telling you, this is a Kuwaiti Arab language newspaper that has made this claim now a couple of times. And Iran is not really telling us what happened. They say, well, one of the explosions was a gas leak. There was a chlorine tank that exploded at another place. Here is at the nuclear facility at Natanz is a building, and you can see the doors here on the right that show that there was an explosion inside that did some damage there. Now, most estimates are that if there's been a setback in the Iranian nuclear program to develop a bomb, it's only been set back a couple months. And then this was the explosion this morning. A fire broke out at a power station in southwestern Iran on Saturday. I guess it was yesterday. The latest in a string of fires and explosions, some of which have hit sensitive sites. And this power plant does have some connection to the Natanz and Bashir nuclear facilities. Danny Gantz, the Blue and White Party, and I guess the assistant or deputy prime minister in Israel said, hey, we're not responsible for everything that happens there. Okay, well, maybe you're responsible for some of it. He wasn't very specific, but so this is happening all over the place. Let me just go through a couple things. So now the big issue is annexation. Are we going to annex things? Caroline Glick has a good article in Israel Hayom on Friday. Trump and Netanyahu face their rendezvous with destiny. She is an advocate that annexation needs to occur. If you look at the ILTV weekly update, it will give you sort of a He'll show you how this thing has developed over time. This is what Israel looked like after the Six-Day War in 1967. Then you will see, of course, they had the Oslo Accords in 1993. That led to further division. And now of course, this is September 13th, 1993, Clinton on the lawn of the White House. I wasn't at that meeting, but a friend of mine in Congress was. I got to see him the next day. I was actually in D.C. that day, though, and I was very cognizant of what was going on and the significance. Let me play a short clip of Caroline Glick, who talks about annexation.
Hello. Thank you so much for joining us today as we proclaim our support for Israeli sovereignty in Judea and Samaria. Not only are we proclaiming our support for Israeli sovereignty over areas of Judea and Samaria and for U.S. recognition of Israeli sovereignty in these areas, we're also here to urge Israel to apply its sovereign rights to these areas in conjunction with the United States as quickly as possible. And why is this important? Well, we understand why it's important, why it's urgent last Wednesday from remarks by UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres. In remarks before the Security Council, Secretary General Guterres said that if Israel applies its sovereign rights to areas in Judea and Samaria, it will mark two devastating events. On the one hand, he said it will be illegal under international law and therefore a blot on the international legal system. And on the other hand, he said that it's going to block all prospects for peace and what he referred to as a two-state solution. But anyway, all prospects for peace between Israel and the Palestinians. Let's start with the second claim about blocking all efforts for peace. We have to remember that we have been stuck in a fake peace process for the past generation. And that fake peace process has been predicated on this idea that Israel, to get peace, has to surrender all of its rights and its very presence in Judea and Samaria, including the Jordan Valley, to the PLO. Only by doing so is peace ever going to be possible. So by applying its sovereignty to parts of these areas, as the Trump plan foresees Israel doing, and as Israel today wants to do, then Guterres says all prospects for peace are going to be off. But this is not true. As we've seen, really, for the past generation, we've been trying to get to peace based on this idea, and it's always failed. Why has it failed? It's failed because it says that Israel is the side to blame for the absence of peace. And how is Israel to blame? Because it asserts control over its ancestral homeland, Judea and Samaria. These, of course, are the cradles of Jewish civilization, of Jewish history, of Christian history. This is where the Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob walked. This is where King David was born. And this is where Jesus was born. And they're saying to us, none of this happened. You have to forget all history. You have to reject that, your historic claims to these areas, and give all of this land to the PLO. Now, what kind of peace can possibly be built on a denial of history? Exactly, no peace. Rather than get peace, you get a piece of paper, which is always a lie, because the PLO sees that if Israel is willing to give up, to surrender its rights to ancestral homeland, then it's not serious, then it's temporary. I mean, what is Tel Aviv to Judea, to Beit El, to Hebron, to Shiloh? It's nothing. So if you can convince the entire international community that Jews are not indigenous to Judea, then what's the problem with getting rid of the rest of the country? There's no problem. That's why all the efforts at peace have failed to date, because they're all based on rejecting history and rejecting the rights of the Jewish people to national self-determination. This comes to the second thing. Why does he say that it's illegal, and why isn't it illegal? There's only one place where the legal rights to sovereignty over Judea and Samaria were defined, and this was in 1922 in the League of Nations mandate for Palestine. The British Empire was enjoined by all of the countries that were members of the League of Nations to develop the land of Israel for the development of a Jewish national home in the homeland of the Jewish people, the land of Israel. And this mandate included Judea and Samaria. All of these rights were given to the Jewish people, the sovereign rights, that is, to the Jewish people, because everybody knew back in 1922 that there was only one people that ever had sovereign rights over these areas, and that was the Jews.
Well, you can look that up at Pulse of Israel. It's a website maintained by Avi Abelo, and he does regular interviews with Caroline at least every other week, anywhere from 40 minutes to an hour and a half. I would highly recommend that you look those up. You can get them through Pulse of Israel, I think it's pulseofisraelnetwork.org. Just Google Pulse of Israel and you'll find it. And so now the question is, if Israel annexes land, is there going to be a third intifada? That's one of the big concerns. And as I noted earlier, the world, this is from Iranian press, world urges Israel to stop land grab bid on Day of Rage. I'm not going to talk too much about this. I will try to cover it next week. I'm going to turn the sound down. This is a video put up by Rabbi Chaim Richman at the Temple Institute in Jerusalem. And they have been monitoring these two red heifers. These red heifers are essential for the rebuilding of the temple. You can read about them in the requirements for the red heifer: no gray hairs. They have to be the age of 2 before they can be sacrificed. And then the ashes of the red heifer are used in a purification ceremony. There's a lot of question now. Do they need I think these would be the 10th, this would be the 10th red heifer in Jewish history. And there's some thinking that they need some part of the ashes of the prior 9. That's at least what some of the Jewish writings indicate, although I think Rabbi Richman may indicate that, well, you know, if the Messiah is here, he can tell us that we don't have to pay attention to the requirements of having the prior ashes of the prior 9 red heifers. I think you need to understand the significance of this in Bible prophecy history, because we know that there will be a temple rebuilt. And so these red heifers have to be 2 years old, and they are getting close to that age. And apparently, the word is they still qualify as red heifers because they're allowed like a couple red white hairs or gray hairs on their bodies. So these are being cared for in Israel. There's a very detailed process that they go through. So that's, I think, a pretty significant thing that here we go. Because we talked about this a couple years ago when they were born, that they were excited about it, and now they're getting to be a couple years old. So now, will they be able to find the other prior 9 red heifer ashes? There are some excavations going on down around Qumran. I believe that is in the area that would be annexed, and any annexation plan that's been put off for a while. The U.S. said we'll give our support or not to annexation within the next 45 days. That's the last thing that I read this morning. So really, I hope you can appreciate that there are a lot of things going on that are Bible prophecy related. But building back on what Caroline said is, like in the Israeli peace process, there's a denial of history. In the revolution that's going on in our country, there's a denial of history. And the point I was trying to make last week was that people of God should look at their history. Now listen, what God ordered Joshua to do was an order of magnitude above putting up a statue of George Washington. But the point is that these things were done to remind people of where they came from, their roots, and what they did and what God had done for them and how God had provided for them. And we're losing that in our world today, and the world is really coming apart. It seems set up for someone who has a plan, a man with a plan, and it'll be interesting to watch how this unfolds. Let's pray. Father, we thank you so much for your word. We thank you for the understanding that you give us through your word about the things that we should look for, so we can understand that the return of the Lord is nearer than it ever was, and that ultimately, though, that you are in control, and that all of these events that will take place, that will fulfill to the letter Bible prophecy, will be done for your glory. I pray that you will give us the mindset that we would act in our own lives to glorify you in gratitude for the gift of your Son, Jesus Christ, and our salvation from our sins and our eternity with you. Bless us this week in Jesus' name. Amen.